Hello my dear friends, how are you? I'm Ravengaard and today I'm going to talk about the bear in both the Sami and in Old Norse pre-Christian religious panorama. So, bear it with me. Now, before we start, first I would like to dedicate this video to my patrons who have been asking me about this specific subject for a very long time. And I want to dedicate this video also to Naomi Passion Flower, who is also my patron, and some time ago we were speaking about this exact subject. Secondly, I'm very happy to see that I'm in a sort of position where I can help others in a way. It's a hard world out there, and I know how it's like to struggle to have a job and, well, making money to have a living and to survive. You wouldn't imagine the terrible jobs I had. Anyway, I'm happy to know that I can help others, and before we start this video, I want to help a friend of mine, so just give me a few seconds if you would be so kind, please. Alright, my dear friends, let me show you these beauties. This was sent to me by Ravengaard True Norse Viking shop, and the words True Norse Viking are very well placed here, and let me tell you why. These aren't random pendants of New Age Viking imagery designs. These are handmade, high quality work with proper metal, and most importantly, these are all replicas from actual Old Norse Viking Age pendants found in the archaeological record. I'll put the links down below in the description for all of these, and in the Etsy shop as well, so you can see the replica and the originals from which these were inspired. So you won't be using jewelry based on modern age design, reimagining Viking Age artistic styles, but instead you will be using, well, in this case wearing actual jewelry based on historical designs of this historical period in Scandinavia. And no, you won't get the originals. This is not archaeologists gone rogue and selling in the black market. Like I said, these are replicas, handmade, high quality, and you won't get more traditional than this. I'll put the links here to the Ravengaard True Norse Viking shop on Etsy, as well as the Facebook and Instagram, so you can check for yourself. Down below in the description of this video you will also have the links, so you can have easy access. Now let's start our today's video. Right, here we go, and I'll be using the early 7th century pendant depicting the god Frey, which will be a little bit related to this subject, as you shall see further ahead, more or less. And thank you for being in there still. Now, I often got the question, what was the role of the bear in Old Norse mythology, or the importance of the bear as a religious symbol in pre-Christian Scandinavia? Right, where to start? When it comes to pre-Christian religious beliefs in the Northern Hemisphere, we have a couple of animals who hold a powerful significance, and one of them is the bear. On the Patreon platform, I've already wrote an academic work about the bear as an important religious symbol in the Middle Ages, and I've made a video also about this subject almost 3 years ago. If we look into Northern Europe, we realize that among the Sami people, we noticed that there were elaborate rituals involving the consumption of bear meat for attracting the spirit of the bear, so the spirit of the animal could be of assistance in particular moments and events. And this is a tradition with animistic roots, obviously, which is shared among many Finno-Ugric peoples. So we would assume that the importance of the bear in neighboring regions of that of the Norse people, Old Norse people, would surely influence pre-Christian Scandinavians, pre-Christian Old Norse people. However, the bear for Scandinavians, for Old Norse people, was most often regarded as ordinary food. Surely, we have written sources concerning the symbol of the bear and related to something more mystical, such as narratives about human and bear sexual relationships, as well as the figure of the Berserker and the Hulfadin. And I shall eventually speak a little bit about these specific figures further ahead. Among the Sami, it was custom to give offerings to a Seiri stone or Seiri altar, which are usually either natural rock formations with strange and unusual shapes or stone structures to which the Sami would give offerings. For instance, fish was the primary sacrificial element, serving as a form of communication between the human community and the divine. So the Sami would grease Seiri stones with fish oil in order to ensure present or future fishing luck in fishing. So concerning bear hunt, it wouldn't be different, and there were offerings to Seiri stones or altars before the actual bear hunt to ensure success. A particular hunter was selected by means of divination, usually selected by the community's Noedi. As you know, it's the term for the Sami spiritual leader, equivalent to the Tunguska shaman. Anyway, during the process of bear hunt, the bear was awakened before the attack to ensure that its wandering spirits were all present at the time of its death. And only one hunter, the one selected through divination, was allowed to attack the bear. You can see in this a great respect expressed towards the bear. Fairness. After the bear was killed, the animal was welcomed in the village as an honored guest. The community, during the ceremony, would eventually feast on the animal's flesh while making certain not to harm his bones, the animal's bones, which would later on be carefully buried after the ceremony. And indeed, in archaeology, many bears, their bones, have been found, indicating the nature of this widespread tradition in the north, in Lapland. And indeed, it's curious to see this respect over the bones of the bear, bearing the bones intact, so that the animal, in the turn of the season or in the turn of its cycle or of the life of this spirit, can go through a process of rebirth and return. And we see parallels with this in Norse mythology with Thor's goats. Precisely when Thor sacrifices his own goats in a feast while staying in the farm of humans who give hospitality to both Thor and Loki, and everyone feasts on the goats, but Thor warns them that they should not break the bones to eat the marrow. And Thialfre then goofed, and well, obviously pushed by Loki as always, and he broke one of the bones. When Thor goes about collecting the bones to revive his goats, he notices that one is in pain, terrible pain, and badly hurt, precisely the one whose leg bone Thialfre had broken to eat the marrow. So in this Norse myth, what the hell is wrong with me? Well, we see parallels with the same Sami animistic understanding, which is quite curious, obviously. Now, getting back to the Sami, the centrality of the bear as a source of animistic power is frequently a subject quite clear among the Sami religious panorama. and the importance of this animal can be observed in its pictographic depictions on Sami drums. In Sami legends as well, we have accounts of Noaidid who could transform themselves into bears, and it would be possible, according to the legends, it would be possible to recognize a human who had been transformed into a bear when the bear was killed, skinned, and under the bear's skin a human belt or money pouch or other human-made objects would be found. So you can imagine, of course, there are Sami legends of men who would transform into bears and obviously have sexual intercourse with human women, resulting in a son with the strength of a bear, which is in fact in Saxo Grammaticus Gesta Danorum we have an interesting account of sexual intercourse between a woman and a bear. A young girl befriends a bear at the bar. No, she befriends a bear and the bear welcomes her into his den, and well, one thing leads to another. Those were crazy days, and the bear eventually impregnated her. This woman gave birth to a son after the bear's death, and the boy becomes the progenitor of the Kundling dynasty. Or, for instance, in Hrolf's saga Hrauka, we have Bodvar, who is the product of a bear and human relationship, sexual relationship. And this hero can transform himself into a bear to help his king in battle. So, in the figure of Bodvar, we notice the embodiment of both the motif of human and bear intercourse, sexual intercourse, as well as that of the Berserker. So these Sami legends were known among the Norse. So this starts to shape into something, and these Sami legends may very well have influenced the Norse people, as we have the figure of the Berserker, which could either be a reference to a warrior dressing in a shirt made from the skin of a bear, or actually a reference to being naked, which I shall explain this further ahead. But the point here, for now, is that the figure of the Berserker, either naked or dressed in a bear's hide, is often someone referred to as having immense strength, like a bear, a gift supposedly bestowed by Odin as it comes in the sagas. But don't worry, in this video I shall speak about the figure of the Berserker and as well as the Ulfetin. Among the Norse, fur from bears was an important export good. In the Old Norse sagas, the bear is often viewed as material to be explored, or consumed, traded, exploited, rather than an actual sacred entity. And we have references that the Norse did trade bear hides with the Sami. For instance, in the account of the voyages of Othere and Wulfstan, the Viking Othar collects bear hides from the Sami, who owe him some tribute. Othar treats the bear hides as market items, exchanging them for valuable goods in various places, including England. And we have accounts of bear hunt among the Norse as well, but unlike the bear hunt among the Sami, which showed respect towards the animal, there were ceremonies involved to ensure successful present or future hunts, maintaining the spirit of the bear as an honored guest, being preoccupied with the rebirth of the animal, having respect for the spirit of the animal, and the bear is characteristically accepted to be a powerful animistic symbol. But among the Old Norse people, however, bear hunt was simply a sign of manliness and not an act of supernatural propitiation. There is also a particularly interesting account about the Icelander Odin, who travels to Greenland and acquired a polar bear from a local trapper, and then takes the animal to Denmark to win the favor of King Svein. So you see, among the Old Norse people, the bear wasn't that all treated as a powerful religious symbol, unlike it was understood in neighboring regions to that of the Old Norse people. For instance, among the Sami and the other Finno-Ugric peoples, and even among the Celts. So, among the Norse, the bear seems to be regarded more like a commodity, or hunting the animal was a sign of masculinity, bravery, manliness, or the animal was treated as a dangerous creature. But I suspect that when we have in the written sources, the bear as a dangerous animal or regarded as something evil, that is possibly already Christian influence, as the bear during the Middle Ages indeed was demonized by the Church. Well, because among many pagans in continental Europe, especially those who somewhat retained Celtic-like culture, the bear was understood to be the king of the forest, until, of course, the Church replaced the bear with the lion. So, the demonization of the bear in medieval sources is already a Christian religious influence, which certainly influenced the Old Norse peoples already during the Viking period, possibly late Viking period. But now I think it's time to jump into the figure of the Berserker and, well, subsequently the figure of the Ulfedin. Let's take a look. Alright, the figure of the Berserker that we find in most sagas is quite the stereotypical unscrupulous person, unpredictable, very dangerous and sexually ravenous. As a matter of fact, a wild person. In fact, that's exactly what they were in a way, because the Berserker, plural, were seen as people outside society, too unpredictable and dangerous to rely on. They follow somewhat the same pattern as the Vargar, wolves. A man who was a killer and performed the killing in stealth was considered a murderer, and thus was referred to as Mordvargar, literally killer wolf, and thus the penalty for the crime was to outlaw the person, banish the person into the wild places of the world, beyond the pale of the law. So anyone could kill these people on sight, because they were no longer seen as human. They did not belong to a community. They were wolves, beasts. A berserker plays somewhat the same role. He is indeed an outsider, unpredictable and dangerous. In Egil's saga, Egil kills a servant when the berserker rage descends on him, and he nearly kills his own son too. So, it's a dangerous person. But here's the thing, we know more about the berserker than we know about the figure of the Ulfedin, the Ulfednar, plural. And the latter seems to be just another type of berserker, either berserker warriors, berserkir warriors who dressed with wolf hides, or we are in the presence of warrior criminals, murderers, berserker criminals and murderers, outlaws, hence the reason why they were so named Ulfedin, Ulfednar, wolf hides, because they were considered to be wolves, Vargar, Mordvargar, killer wolf. Bear it with me, please. In Old Norse literature, the berserker is seen as someone actually bad, and no one was speaking of themselves and shouting out loud as being a berserker. It was not something positive. In the Old Norse sources, literary sources, when someone is called a berserker, that person or character is often not a good person. The bear, for instance, is depicted in Beowulf epic. Some versions describe Grendel with a bare head, and the cult of Grendel's mother is related to dressing up as bears. So we see the bear in here as something evil, and the demonization of the bear considered as an evil symbol of sorts. Nowadays, it became quite popular, this idea of the berserker as a fierce warrior, belonging to a group of elite warriors within some sort of bear cult. But what comes in the sagas is quite different, as they were not at all popular back then, and in fact it's quite clear they were seen as evil people, dangerous, unreliable, outlaws, outsiders. We usually link the berserker to the figure of the bear, and the Ulfedin to the wolf. Therefore, they are seen as warriors who cover themselves with fur, either in bear's fur or wolf's fur, respectively, which led to the assumption that they were warriors in some sort of tribal cult to these animals. However, there is a problem in relation to the berserker, simply because of the suffix ber. It doesn't just designate the word bear, the animal, but also bear as in naked, in the sense of absence of clothing, or sometimes, more often, absence of armor, absence of protection. Thus, we start to work with two hypotheses here. The first, in which this suffix has a much older origin, and that can be indeed referred to the animal, or that it simply has another meaning, referred to nakedness, being naked, the absence of protection. The Ulfedin, on the other hand, can be safely translated as the skin of a wolf, or the skin of the wolves, wolfadnar, or wolf skins or wolf hides. The etymological differences here are in the characterization of the berserker as the warrior who fights without protection, or another hypothesis is to fight using a bear skin. So the Ulfadnar are actually just berserkir covered with wolf hides, wolf skins, when they are not either using protection or using a bear skin. Or a berserker becomes a Ulfedin when he becomes a criminal, when his uncontrollable and untrustworthy behavior leads him to become a murderer, and the person wasn't actually wearing a wolf skin. As I was saying, a berserker becomes a Ulfednar when he becomes a criminal, when his uncontrollable and untrustworthy behavior leads him to become a murderer. And the person wasn't actually wearing a wolf skin, but was so named as a form of adjective, a literary stylistic device referring to something indirectly, a kinning. However, in the Ynglinga saga, we have a clear characterization of the figure of the berserker. There is a clear connection between the berserker and with Odin, and the warriors enter in Berserker Gangra. They acquire strength and invulnerability to iron and fire, invulnerability to battle wounds, a gift bestowed by Odin himself, supposedly. Furthermore, their animalistic connection is clear. The howling and the biting of the shields are terrifying demonstrations aimed at enemies who will know immediately that the warriors are preparing themselves, entering in a state of fury, as it is described in the Ynglinga saga, right? So, it's quite possible that in times of war, conflict, it wasn't a case of calling upon an elite group of warriors as some sort of allies or mercenaries, but it's possible that certain political powers, lords, chieftains, possibly even kings, called upon criminals and very, very dangerous people, outlaws, and incorporated them into their own army, as a form of perhaps pardon for their crimes. So the portrayal of these people as wild beasts isn't actually praise, which led to the belief they were fierce warriors, but it may actually be negative criticism, defamation, denigration, portraying these people, these outlaws, as wild animals, taking away their humanity, as they are no longer welcomed in the civilized society. It could very well be negative criticism on the point of view of the civilized society of the Old Norse people, because they did not call Berserkir actual warriors. They called them Berserkir, bare skins, either with the animal hide or naked. And this nakedness might not be without protection or without clothing, but naked as in without that which makes someone a human, that makes someone a civilized human. As members within an army, they are a means to an end, a useful evil. They were not seen as citizens, not seen as warriors, but as bears, beasts, like the outlaws called Vargar, murderers and criminals, Ulfednar, Berserkir, labeled wolves and bears due to their criminal behavior. Now, this is a possible interpretation based on the sources, the literary sources, where we clearly read that Berserkir and Ulfednar were not seen as something positive. The positiveness reflected in these figures is actually a modern interpretation. I know some people will possibly frown upon this. Hey, Arif, you are demonizing our cultural heritage. The Berserkers and Ulfednar were fierce warriors belonging to a tribal cult of the bear and the wolf. I follow and practice this ancestral cult, and I can shapeshift into a bear when I go to the grocery store. Grow the fuck up! You are neither a wolf nor a bear. And how would you practice something that never existed in the first place in this specific culture, in this specific period? And even if it had ever existed in Old Norse religion, there are no clues, no indications about this specific cult. And you are either role-playing, which is cool, or relying on some gibberish popping up on a New Age blog. There, I said it. But I reinforce, what I said earlier about Berserkir and Ulfednar is a possible interpretation, and I underline a possible interpretation. I still want to make a video about these figures and the possible use of hallucinogenic substances, and I will also want to talk about the warrior fury that could have been a special attribute of perhaps an elite warrior class, maybe, possibly, as well as the shape-shifting character and the role of the Berserkir in Viking age society. All this that I have said about Berserkir and Ulfednar will still be a subject I will talk about in a future video, and I will delve much more into this subject when the time comes. The point here is to show you that the bear, the animal, in pre-Christian Old Norse context, wasn't seen as an important religious symbol. Only among the Sami and some rare cultural pockets of Old Norse people in close proximity with the Sami, which we shall speak of it in a moment. Now, if there was a bear cult in Old Norse religion, most likely it was similar to the one I have spoken previously among the Sami. In fact, we seem to have a great void on the sacrality of the bear in Scandinavian tradition, Old Norse tradition, except for one specific archaeological finding, the only one so far, which shows some evidences of bear sacrifices at Fröse in Jotunland, in Sweden. The presence of the Christian church in this particular place sits atop a pre-Christian sacrificial site, which consisted in a birch tree stump that received a succession of cremated offerings over a very long time, over a very long period. And generally the bones recovered from such a site are primarily of domesticated animals like swine and cattle, but bear bones have also been found. Please read the note below. I think it contains important information for this particular case. But aside from this particular place, overall in Scandinavian archaeology, in Old Norse context, the bear is absolutely absent from archaeology because, and one possible explanation for this is that one couldn't sacrifice a wild animal that one doesn't own. Sacrifices were mostly of things people owned, personal things, things with personal value, property. And no one owned a bear. It wasn't an extensively domesticated animal, and surely it wasn't kept as a farm animal and as a food resource. Now, a bear skin, now that might have been an offering, as they were costly products in the Scandinavian market all across Europe and of course beyond. And a bear skin might have been a sacrifice, which obviously disappears from the archaeological context, especially because most sacrifices were burned. Sami sacrificial sites, in contrast, have generally almost entirely reindeer and wild species such as the bear. But this is understandable because each community clearly venerated animal species whose consumption and nutrition and supplies these communities needed to survive. Old Norse people survival relied much more on cattle, farm animals, fish, and little on bear and reindeer. So there was no particular emphasis on the figure of the bear in Old Norse religion, culture in general, and more emphasis on animals who were traditionally consumed or animals that were understood to be status symbols, symbols of power and wealth, such as the boar and cattle. And the same thing happens among the Sami. They relied on bear meat, as well as reindeer and fish, and those are the most important animals among the Sami in their religious panorama. And you hardly find either other animals in their religious culture. Now, obviously this doesn't mean the Sami only ate bear and reindeer and fish. Obviously, in Sami culture, other animals were consumed, traded with the Norse people. But of all the animals borrowed from outside communities, such as cattle, chickens and goats and the horse, none was elevated to a high category in the Sami religious panorama. None was counted as powerful animals as the bear was among the Sami, and, well, reindeer and other wild animals, of course, as well as mythic beasts. So, yes, indeed, the bear as a religious symbol in Scandinavia had a greater importance among the Sami than it had among the pre-Christian Old Norse people. Now, if we speak about continental Old Germans, in continental Europe, then yes, we find a lot more religious emphasis around the figure of the bear in continental Germanic regions of the past, before Christianization, obviously. But I shall speak about that on a future video when I delve into the Berserkers and the Ulfhednar. So before any conclusions on that, and before you criticize this, wait until I create a video about that specific subject. Alright, my dear friends, thank you so much for watching. Please visit Ravengaard True Norse Viking shop at Etsy. I'll put the links in here and down below the description as well. And I apologize if previously I have coughed a lot. I almost died. I don't know what's wrong with me today. Strange. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for your support and friendship as well to me and to my friend. And as always, tack för idag.